My next guest is South African filmmaker Wayne Kramer, who wrote and directed several movies, including The Cooler, starring Alec Baldwin and William H. Macy, and Running Scared, starring Paul Walker. Running Scared is, by the way, one of my all-time favorite movies. Today he's going to pitch a hard R reinterpretation of the James Bond franchise that goes back to Ian Fleming's source material.
Hi, my name is Wayne Kramer, and today I'm going to pitch you my hard R-rated James Bond trilogy. I saw my first James Bond film, Goldfinger, when I was about 8 years old. Growing up in South Africa, it wasn't as easy to see it on television. It was Sean Connery as Bond, and it sort of blew my mind that there was this cool character that existed in this universe. And after seeing Goldfinger, I wanted to find out more about Bond. I wanted to see all the other Bond films. So I also started reading around that time the Ian Fleming novels. And what I started to realize was that the novels definitely had a harder edge than what I was seeing in the films. And they were actually more violent and more sexual, although in a somewhat restrained manner. Between ages of 8 and 10, I read all Fleming's Bond books. 2 years ago, I started rereading them again as somebody who's actually a filmmaker, and thinking, man, how different the Bond movies, especially any Bond movie post, say, Thunderball, was to what Fleming did. James Bond was probably the most tortured character of all time. And I don't mean mentally tortured. I mean, people get a hold of him and they'd break his fingers. As you saw in Casino Royale, the movie, he's naked in a chair, and some guy's throwing like a huge knotted rope at his testicles. That's who James Bond was. You know, he was also one of the toughest motherfuckers in literature and in film. A little bit on the misogynistic side as a character, but you kind of loved him for it anyway. It all seems to be weaned out of the Bond movies as they've progressively moved on. Around the times of the early 70s, films were getting way grittier, and sex and violence were almost required to be in movies like this. I don't think Dr. No and From Russia with Love, Goldfinger, I don't think those movies would have been as chaste as they are today. They just happen to be victims of the period that they were made in. There is no better universe. It's almost like the Bond character you see today in film is like in a cage. He wants to get out. All these different women, but you never see anything. You know, they're always trying to hide the breasts with the sheet or different angles. But, you know, Bond is the ultimate stud. And it was kind of like the series was kind of hinting that it wanted to go there with Goldfinger, with the most iconic image from Goldfinger, Shirley Eaton's gold-painted body draped over Bond's bed. You think about the James Bond film Live and Let Die. The whole setup for the lead female character, Solitaire, is that Bond takes her virginity. And after that, she doesn't have the power of second sight anymore. And for that, Mr. Big wants to kill her. And Live and Let Die was one of the great Ian Fleming novels that most of it didn't get to the screen. What was interesting about Live and Let Die was two of the most violent scenes from that film ended up in other Bond movies later on. Feeding Felix Leiter to the sharks was used in License to Kill. From For Your Eyes Only, where Roger Moore and Caroline Bouquet are tied up, Bond's arms are cut, and they're supposed to drag him through over the coral reef, and the sharks are supposed to tear him up. That was also from Live and Let Die. So I find it fascinating how dark that Ian Fleming novel was. It would be great to see a Bond movie done today with the real intensity and sexuality and violence that the Fleming novels promised. The Blofeld Trilogy would start with Thunderball, sort of the least amount of Blofeld, but he's the man behind the scenes. Blofeld's plot to steal the nuclear weapons. Bond goes down to the Bahamas, and he tracks him down, and he falls in love with Largo's girlfriend and defeats Largo at the end of the movie in this great underwater battle. And that would be another thing to do with all the cool modern technology of shooting underwater and spear fights and weapons and all that kind of stuff. And one of the problems with the movie Thunderball was you couldn't almost tell who was fighting who. Even though Thunderball kind of was remade, or pretty much was remade, as Never Say Never Again when Connery came back into the series. Blofeld has arrived on the scene with Spectre in Thunderball. And the next Bond movie is On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which I think is the perfect Bond story. The opening of On Her Majesty's Secret Service is classic, where Bond sees Tracy, the woman who's going to become his wife. She's headed down to the beach, and he follows her, and she's trying to commit suicide. Bond saves her, and he later meets up with her at a casino, and she bets too much money, and Bond saves her again at the tables. And she repays his debt that night by sleeping with him, and then she's gone in the morning. Thugs come for him the next morning, and Draco, who's Tracy's father, wants Bond to marry his daughter and tame her, and for that on the wedding day he's going to give him £1 million in gold. Bond realizes that Draco has information that can help him to track Ernest Stavros Blofeld. So Tracy hears about this and tells her father, give him the information, and if he wants to marry me or for anything further than that, it's up to Bond. Blofeld is trying to legitimize himself as a count in Switzerland, and he needs it to be verified by people who do the coats of arms. Bond impersonates the guy that's supposed to do the verification, so Hilary Bray. He meets up with Blofeld and Blofeld's henchwoman Irma Bunt. They take him by helicopter to this beautiful Swiss chalet up in the mountains above a ski resort. Beautiful women from all over the world who have food allergies that they don't realize it, but he's brainwashing them to return to their countries with biological devices that would destroy the food sources and the economy. After betting a few of them, Bond figures this out. They find out who Bond is, and Bond's trapped there. Bond has to escape down the side of the mountain. Incredible ski action scenes that probably haven't ever been done as well. Bond skis down the side of the mountain with Blofeld and Blofeld's men after him. He arrives at the ski resort. Blofeld's men come after them again, and they continue skiing again, and this time Blofeld creates an avalanche, traps Bond, and Bond defeats Blofeld, and even in the movie he actually is still alive, although you think he breaks his neck, because there's this great action scene that takes place down the bobsled track, and Bond is together with Tracy and asks her to marry him. The film cuts to their wedding day, and after the ceremony, Bond stops on the side of the road with Tracy, and they're getting intimate, and all of a sudden this black Mercedes, whatever it is, drives by and opens fire on Bond's car, and Tracy is killed. It makes On Her Majesty's Secret Service unique as a Bond film because other than Vesper dying in Casino Royale, she was kind of revealed to be a villain at the end. This is the woman that Bond married, and the movie ends literally. I mean, it's an insane ending for a Bond movie. If you could think today that James Bond's wife's killed, he's holding her and saying, "We have all the time in the world," and that's it. That's the end of the movie. Bond will be back. The screen says, "And diamonds are forever." But actually, Bond's back in the trilogy that I want to do in You Only Live Twice, because You Only Live Twice hasn't been made yet in my universe, and I'm following the Ian Fleming chronology. So now Bond is just hungry for revenge, tracks Blofeld down to Japan. Blofeld has this bizarre, macabre castle of death where he sort of encourages anyone who wants to come kill themselves to scale the walls. And there's all these poisonous plants, insects, sulfuric pools, and Bond, just to even get to Blofeld, has to navigate all that. The Blofeld trilogy ends up with Bond tracking Blofeld and Irma Bunt down in Japan, in his castle, where he has the final confrontation with them, where he kills them both, which is actually interesting. He ends up with, I think her name's Kishizuki, the Japanese love interest who lives in this fishing town, and she's a very simple, beautiful young pearl diver. I think he makes the decision he's not going back to the Secret Service. There's an obituary printed for Bond that he's dead. And at the end of You Only Live Twice, Bond is going to live out his idyllic life in Japan. Of course, we know he's going to come back and shit's going to happen. So that's how those three books and films play into each other. I did read recently that they finally got the rights back to Thunderball. That means they can now use the character Blofeld, where they haven't been able to do that before. Here's what I would want to do an R-rated Bond movie. My favorite Bond movie is From Russia with Love. I think it's the perfect Bond movie with Sean Connery. And then my second favorite Bond movie is actually Casino Royale, the reboot of Daniel Craig, not the crappy Peter Sellers one. Actually, the best Bond movie of all time is On Her Majesty's Secret Service. It's got George Lazenby, who I think is just wooden as hell in that role. Every time I watch On Her Majesty's Secret Service, in my mind I'm actually recasting it with Sean Connery. It's got real consequences for the main characters. James Bond marries the love of his life, Tracy DiVincenzo, and she's murdered in the end by Irma Bunt, Blofeld henchwoman. So in fact, what I really would love to do is remake the Blofeld trilogy, which would be Thunderball, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and You Only Live Twice, do them as R-rated films and actually set them in the 60s, which Fleming wrote the novels. In On Her Majesty's Secret Service, when Bond goes up to the Swiss chalet up to the top of the mountains, that's where Blofeld has got all these beautiful young women from all different countries, where he's doing brainwashing on them, biological warfare on all the different agricultural products around the world, and create disaster with the economies. It's just Bond alone up top at the top of the chalet with Blofeld and like 13 of the hottest women. On Her Majesty's Secret Service was actually supposed to be made after You Only Live Twice. Chronology of the Bond movies, it went Thunderball, You Only Live Twice on Her Majesty's Secret Service, which totally screwed up the storyline. In You Only Live Twice, that's the third chapter of the Blofeld Trilogy, and that's, even though they used Blofeld in Diamonds Are Forever, Blofeld was never in the Diamonds Are Forever novel. He dies in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. But they just decided to keep him alive as a character because they screwed it up. Because what happens is, in You Only Live Twice, Blofeld starts the whole thing in Thunderball with stealing the atomic bombs. And Blofeld's really like a peripheral character. He's the head of Spectre in that. And you don't see him that much, but he's introduced with the cat and everything. In You Only Live Twice, he's actually then stealing the... This is the movie, which is very different. I want to get into the book too, which is one of the most nightmarish, bizarre Fleming novels of all time. But in the movie, it's another plot to cause world war between Russia and the US. Blofeld is played by Donald Pleasence, who's actually on my t-shirt here. This isn't Dr. Evil, in case you were thinking that. Blofeld sees exactly what Bond looks like. Bond defeats him, Blofeld escapes in You Only Live Twice. The next Bond movie is On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which the book came before You Only Live Twice in the series of novels. So in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, when Bond turns up impersonating Sir Hilary Bray, who's the guy who's come to verify whether Blofeld is actually a real count. Blofeld sees Bond face to face and doesn't recognize him as James Bond, even though George Lazenby's playing him and Connery played him in You Only Live Twice. But there's no reason why Blofeld wouldn't know this is James Bond in his presence. It's a huge plotline flaw in the movies, which didn't exist in the novels, because On Her Majesty's Secret Service took place right after Thunderball. I don't know if that sounds too confusing, but if you think about it, you'll figure it out. And the end of On Her Majesty's Secret Service ends with Blofeld being responsible for the death of Bond's wife. The next film went on to be Diamonds Are Forever, which was one of the sort of weaker entries. It's James Bond in Las Vegas. Sean Connery came back to play Bond for the last time in the actual Albert Broccoli, Harry Saltzman series. And Blofeld is played by Charles Gray this time, and there's all different people getting plastic surgery to look like Blofeld, and the whole thing's a mess. But in the novel, You Only Live Twice, Bond tracks Blofeld down to Japan after Blofeld has killed his wife in the book On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which in the films hadn't happened yet, because You Only Live Twice was first. I mean, everything's different about the book. Some of the characters are the same from the book to the film, but the entire plot line, I don't remember what the damn movie plot of You Only Live Twice is, and I've just seen it again recently. In the novel, what I love about it is Blofeld has bought a castle in Japan, and it's basically, he set it up to be like a suicide castle. Blofeld actually attracts people to come to this castle, like, supposedly they're not supposed to get onto the grounds, but he knows they're climbing over the walls, and they're coming to kill themselves, and Bond has to impersonate a Japanese person, and he gets on there, and he confronts Blofeld. It's a completely different novel, and I would like to do the novel of You Only Live Twice. The Austin Powers series imitates Bond movies. They're usually doing You Only Live Twice. Super hideout, whether it's up in space, or it's in a volcano, or it's underwater, like Stromberg in Your Spy Love Me. I think that's where, for me, the Bond series started going wrong. Doing an R-rated trilogy of the Blofeld series, and doing away with the cliches of Blofeld. He wouldn't have a white cat. He wouldn't wear the silly tunic. He was a really formidable villain, super rich, and Stromberg wants to destroy the world, and Drax in Moonraker also wants to destroy the world and start a colony up in space. I mean, why would these people want to limit themselves to living in a space state, or he's going to come down and there's nobody else on Earth? So what's the point of holding all these countries hostage for billions of dollars if you've destroyed the planet and there's nothing to spend it with? It's just bizarre. But at one point, that wasn't what James Bond was. If you go back to the plots of From Russia with Love, Goldfinger, Thunderball, these were great plots. I think at the core of what motivates James Bond is his love for country. He's content with a life of masquerading as whoever the Secret Service sends him out to be. Somehow he's always got a lot of money to play roulette or baccarat or all these these high stakes games. I think he's an ultimate playboy. He's the ultimate bachelor, which is also what makes On Her Majesty's Secret Service so fascinating. Is when he finally decides to commit and settle down, it gets taken away from him. And you can only imagine that the James Bond that sort of rises or emerges out of the ashes of that destroyed relationship is even more hardcore than you'll ever see. I mean, I think what made Tracy such a catch for Bond was a combination of being a little bit damaged. She's like this wounded bird, but she's tough. She's got pride, she's got dignity, she comes from wealth. She's been looking for her equal for so long. When she makes up her mind to kill herself in the beginning, I think she's at the point where she never thinks she'll find a man her equal. She's saved by when he agrees to marry her, give her the life that maybe she never thought was possible. What motivates Blofeld Blofeld in this trilogy, I mean, I think you could almost look at him as like some kind of corporate raider. You know, he wants it all. I think he's a perfect villain for where we are today, where you look at some of these corporations, just these golden parachutes these guys get, or while people are losing their assets, these guys are getting bonuses in the millions and millions. And I think Blofeld is a reflection of that. He doesn't want to destroy the world like I think you've seen in some of the cornier Bond movies, because he's got to live in the world. Especially in the United States, money is power. I mean, it always is. Even though it says in God we trust on the money, in money we trust is basically, it turns the world. And I think Blofeld's a complete opposite to Bond. Bond is not motivated by money. Bond will die for his country. I don't think Blofeld's willing to die for anybody. But like extremists we get in the world, Blofeld's willing to push 100 men before him to die. My favorite Bond has always been Sean Connery, but I really do love Daniel Craig. I think he, as a modern Bond, embodies the toughness and the physicality of who I see James Bond to be. But Daniel Craig looks like he could break you over his knee. You know, I think the closest an R-rated James Bond, a Bond movie has come to being R-rated is Casino Royale. I have a theory that if the character's name in Casino Royale, the movie, the reboot, was not James Bond, I think that film would have got an R rating. And actually, I don't think many people know this, but Casino Royale was actually trimmed a couple of scenes of violence for the US audience. If you buy it on Blu-ray from the UK, you can see an uncut version of Casino Royale. What might have been an R-rated Bond movie is The Tale of Panama. Pierce Brosnan plays the anti-James Bond. It's a very underrated film. Nobody speaks about it anymore. But it's what happens if you unleash a guy like James Bond onto the scene and he does everything against his code of what he's supposed to do. I consider that to be the best Pierce Brosnan Bond movie of them all. By the time you got to Die Another Day in Pierce Brosnan, you've got invisible cars and all kinds of shit that should never be in the Bond series. They sort of toned down the violence in the next two, and I think by the time you get Sam Mendes' Skyfall, which is probably the most successful Bond movie of all time, I just find it's almost become a pastiche of the series, and it's relying on the jokes or flashbacks to Bond's past to sell the joke. And the other thing that sort of gets me about Skyfall, which is a really well made film as far as technically, but it's the most incompetent we've ever seen James Bond on screen. He can do nothing right. He can't defeat the guy on the train in the beginning carrying thumb drive with all the agents on. And in this day and age, why would anyone carry a thumb drive with agents anyway? They would just put it into a Hotmail file or some kind of encrypted online thing. Bond gets shot, survives a miraculous, 1,000-foot fall into a river. And then he's responsible for getting M killed, and nobody says anything about it. He just, because the villain is a computer hacker, if you're trying to protect the head of the British Secret Service and the best you can do is drag her off to some home up in the Highlands or wherever it is, it's got no high ground for defense, it's got no weapons except one or two old shotguns. The bad guy's coming at you with a team of mercenaries and high-tech weaponry and assault choppers. I think that's just pure irresponsible. I mean, Bond could have just put M on a plane and flown her to the United States. There were a million different options. That whole ending, it just doesn't work. It's such a portrayal of the Bond character. I'm all for seeing him get hurt, get put out of business for 6 months, lose the woman, do all these kind of things. But he's not a fool. He knows what's coming for him. And I want to respect Bond. While it's the on-screen violence that's been toned down a lot in James Bond films, it's the sexuality that's taken the biggest hit. Bond is seducing all these women, but you never actually see what makes them come back for more. Being such a sadistic kind of guy, Bond has to be great in the bedroom. I would love to see the R-rated James Bond movie based on the sex scenes, but we know, because the Bond franchise is one of the most protected franchises of all time, it's made billions of dollars, they're certainly not going to want to rock the boat. There were rumors that Quentin Tarantino wanted to do a version of Casino Royale, and you know sure as hell that wasn't going to be the Martin Campbell version, which I do love that movie, so I'm not putting that down in any way. If you look at some of the Bond poster work and one-sheets and art, the international artwork, there are literally a bunch of them that actually do have nudity, and I think they usually come out of Europe or Greece or some of these countries. But there's a Sean Connery poster from Thunderball that actually has him lying on the massage table, being tended to by that hot nurse. He's butt naked, if you see the original poster of that. I think the Blofeld Bond trilogy would be best set in the 60s, and what I love about it is because that's when Fleming wrote them. The plots were conceived for the 60s, so to say all of a sudden we're going to update them to 2015, 16, 18, whatever it is, I think you're just injecting so much unneeded technology into it. I hate seeing movies with people on their cell phones. It's such a pleasure to watch the TV show and nobody pulls out a fucking cell phone. They still had tracking devices, they had missiles, they had things to swim underwater with that could never possibly work. The little thing you put in your mouth and you suck on that, I don't think. There's a certain coolness to the 60s era, the swinging 60s, especially in England, the elegance of the fashion, the cars, the hairstyles, the colors. You know, Austin Powers, again, has made a pastiche out of that, but I think there was something so cool about the period. When I think of James Bond, I think of Sean Connery and his bespoke suits and the elegance of the period of the casinos. I just don't want the fucking internet coming in on it. A lot of browns and grays, dark gray suits, dark brown suits, like almost like you would do Bond like American Hustle did the fashion, almost revealing low-cut cleavage, short miniskirt. The 60s was the miniskirt period, high heels. I like the Daniel Craig era a little bit, but I really come back to the Connerys. Something else about the Bond series, I would kick myself if I left here before I mention it, is the fucking gun barrel. You do not put it at the end of the Bond movie. When I was a kid and I used to go to the Bond movies and the lights came down, you would get the black screen, then United Artists logo would come up, and then you would see the white circles crossing the screen with John Barry's like Bond theme, and then the gun barrel came on and I'd be smiling from cheek to cheek, and I probably never smiled much in those days. The last two movies, for whatever reason, they put the gun barrel at the end of the movie where, so what, who gives a fuck? The movie's over, there's no anticipation for it. And I always had a great idea for an opening of a James Bond movie, and it starts with the gun barrel, and as he spins around, somebody shoots him first. You actually build in that walk into the Bond movie. I think it would be very cool. And the other essential thing about James Bond movies, and I think this man, everybody important to the James Bond series, as any Bond who's ever played him, any director, and that is John Barry, who does the Bond scores. John Barry gave James Bond its musical signature. You know, although Monty Norman is credited with composing the James Bond theme, it's really John Barry who took some piece of music that you would not even recognize as a James Bond theme today. He reorchestrated it, he made it kick-ass, and there's a reason why Monty Norman wasn't hired to do From Russia with Love onwards, is because it was the John Barry sound. And the more contemporary movies have kind of moved away from this great John Barry sound. Sorry to keep shitting on Skyfall, but that was not a very Bondian score. David Arnold is a really good John Barry substitute when he's allowed to be in full John Barry mode. And his Casino Royale score was beautiful. You know, it had very John Barry-esque themes. And they need to move it back with the lush themes. One of the reasons John Barry stopped composing for Bond, he had the opportunity to do Tomorrow Never Dies, but they would not let him compose the title song. And if you know anything about the Bond movies, the title song has always been based on the theme of the movie. So for John Barry to not be able to set up the theme that he's going to play with for all the characters and the action, and not be able to do it, I can understand why he said, screw this, even though he's very close with the Broccoli family. The actors I'd cast in my Bond trilogy, I think right now, ideally, Michael Fassbender would be perfect as Bond. For the R-rated Bond, since Michael has let it all hang out in a movie like Shame and some other stuff, you know, it'd be good to have a Bond, and I think Michael would be comfortable. He's a well-endowed guy. It'd be perfect for James Bond. I love Daniel Craig as well. I could see Michael Fassbender really fitting into like a 60s kind of reboot of the Blofeld Trilogy. Ben Kingsley would make an awesome Blofeld. Ben Kingsley's character from Sexy Beast and transposing him into a Bond movie, I think he'd be a formidable Blofeld or somebody like that. For Tracy, I think the perfect Bond girl for my trilogy would be Natalie Dormer. You see her right now in Game of Thrones. Would be perfect as Tracy because she looks almost like Diana Rigg. And Game of Thrones was so smart about it, they actually cast Diana Rigg to play her mother. She looks just like Diana Rigg from On Her Majesty's Secret Service. And Diana Rigg was also Emma Peel from the Avengers. If Natalie Dormer does well in my Bond movie, she can go and reboot Emma Peel as well. And she'll probably take her clothes off because she's done it a few times already. So she's perfect for the R-rated Bond trilogy. And that's about it. The Blofeld Trilogy, don't ham it up. He's a cool sexual predator. Try to torture Bond, you'll never get the answers. You want the guys tough as hell. That's the kind of thing I want to see in Bond movies. I want to see audacious, grounded kind of stunts and action. Even though he can look great in a tuxedo and across from a baccarat table, he's a scrapper. And I do think that's a little bit of what Craig brings and what Michael Fassbender would bring to the Bond series is James Bond is his own sex symbol. If the women starring in the roles are complaining about, well, why do we have to take our clothes off? Bond should take his clothes off too. And we're not talking about pornographic scenes, just sexier, just spice it up. I mean, it's the perfect series to do it with. The violence, a little more grittier, hardcore, in your face. Some profanities, never been in the series, more than, I think, a couple of shits or something. You know, I think under extreme stress, you know, Bond would probably tell someone to go fuck themselves. There's a lot of potential for doing this, and I'll continue to dream about it.
What if Tarantino made a Batman movie? They don't just exist in some writer's head. They're a little too out there. If you'd like me to keep making more, please share this with all your friends. I hope you enjoy them.